My name is Matar Haller. Matar rhymes with guitar. I'm the VP Data and AI here at ActiveFence. And although I have 3 kids, I don't drink caffeine. I drink decaf black tea with milk.
What is up, MLOps community? You are back for another podcast with your host, aka me, Dimitrios. I'm going to be real with you. Before you go any further, if you are one of those people that does not like hearing about the dark shit in the world, do not listen to this episode. If you get triggered easily, we go into some depths and the throes of the internet, the horribleness out there, and how AI plays its part in helping to make sure that there is not as much horribleness on the internet. Matar walked us through these very high stakes AI use cases on keeping hate speech and all kinds of nasty stuff off the internet, and how her company, ActiveFence, is playing its part. I'm going to leave it at that. I'll let you decide if you want to go forward or not. Let's get into it. If you enjoy this episode, you know what to do. Share it with a friend who has the ability to listen to this type of stuff, or give us some feedback. Spotify's got a cool thing where you can give us a few stars. We'd love that. All right, let's get into it. I'm going to start it with this. We met because you were presenting at the Tecton Apply conference, the virtual conference, and there was a ton of amazing talks, but by far the one talk that stood out to me just because of the novelty and the good that you are doing was your talk. And so I want to explain, I thought, well, first I have to have you on here, and I want to explain a bit of what I remember of that talk, and then you can maybe fill in the blanks of what it is that you're doing. And so you are using AI to make sure to, I think it's, you called it AI safety tech. And so you are making sure that when there is hate speech, when there is stuff that we just don't want online, you can detect that and make sure that it is cleaned up. So that's like first part. Can we start there? I know I just gave a gigantically broad overview of it, but now I'll let you fill in the details.
So I don't know what talk you're talking about. My talk was about dinosaurs. You're like...
I was way off. Wait a minute.
So yeah, that's right. So my talk was about using AI for trust and safety, and how at ActiveFence we are an AI trust and safety company, and what that means, and how it's done, and why it's a super hard problem, but one that is also incredibly impactful and touches us, all of us, every day.
I think one thing that you did go into pretty in detail in that talk, and we'll leave the link to that talk in the description for anybody that just wants to go directly to that before they come and listen to this, but you mentioned why it is so hard. And you kind of went over all these different use cases on, whoa, wouldn't you think that this should be okay or not okay? And there's a lot of ethics involved. There's a lot of times where I was saying to myself, like, yeah, I think that's okay. And then it's like, oh, you do? Well, maybe you want to think twice about that. And so.
Yeah, it's so, first of all, I think it's like, besides the fact that it's hard, it's also really, really important, right? So like, who cares? Like, why even trust and safety? Why is this even an issue? And I think trust and safety isn't a new concept, right? Like, if you think about what happens online, so online harm can lead to offline harm, right? I think, like, for me, the most like visceral and jarring example of that was what happened January 6th, with like all of this, like, this misinformation that we were tracking prior to elections, and that we were notifying platforms about to take down, and what that led to with the Capitol riots and so forth. So there's many, many examples that we can think about where online harm can sort of leak offline, and so much of our lives are online. And also, I mean, as a mom, it's something that I like care about deeply. I told my daughter, like, she's 9, and all she's asking about all the time is a cell phone. And I'm like, maybe when you're 35, maybe. But at the end of the day, like, this is something that's like, it touches all of us, right? Whether it's comments on posts or chats or videos that we see or images that we share. It's like our lives are online. And although trust and safety isn't new, it's now, I think, after sort of these sort of big events that we've seen, like I said, January 6th, and also some really well-known trust and safety fiascos that if you think back, they'll come to mind. It's finally something like really, really being discussed, right? Like we'll see it in the media and even like regulators and legislation and the Digital Safety Act and even users now care about this, right? It used to be that like it wasn't even something that us as users would think about when we went online for a platform, but now like we're exposed in a lot of ways to a lot more hate speech or a lot more bullying or just really vile content, and it could be just because oftentimes content moderation just isn't good enough, and also because it's an extremely adversarial space, and so we can talk about why it's important to companies and to users. It gives a competitive advantage. You don't want to be exposed to that. But like you said, it's also really, really hard. Well,
can you break down a few of the use cases? Because I know we're talking a little bit high level, but exactly what is it that some of the things that you're doing so we can get a better sense of why this can be so hard?
Yeah. So at ActiveFence, we are in the content moderation space. We don't do the moderation, right? We flag it for the platforms. We give every item. We have an API. Platforms can send their content to us, and then it gets a probability of risk. And what do we mean when we say content? This content can be audio, video, images, text. The text can be comments, they can be chats, they can be usernames, they can be descriptions, they can be titles, it can be podcasts, it can be short. The space of online stuff is huge, and we deal with all of that. And not only do we deal with that, but also the text can be in many, many different languages. And there's many, many, many different cultural contexts, right? Calling someone a dog in one language versus another language has very, very different meanings. And if we're gonna be trying to keep users safe, we need to be aware of that and how slang changes and so forth. So it's difficult because it requires sort of subject matter expertise, right? You need to know the language, you need to know the slang, you need to know in images, you need to know, is this logo of a hate speech group? Is this logo benign? Is this just like, it's constantly changing. So unfortunately, there's new child abuse content every day. There's new hate speech groups every day. And also the bad actors, like they're not stupid, right? They're bad, but they're not stupid. And so they're trying to evade detection. And so they'll use phrases, they'll use lead speech, they'll try to obscure stuff. So it's a very, hopefully I brought it down a bit from the high level. It's like very concrete in terms of like the media types and the challenges.
Yeah, exactly. And so you're getting all kinds of input data that is basically coming through the API, and you're saying, yes, this looks good, or, ooh, maybe like, do you give a scale of how potentially harmful this could be? And then you send it back to the people that sent it to you?
Yeah. So what we have is basically we have something that we call policy management. And so it's sort of this UI where clients can come in and they can basically decide what for them is a violation of policy. So I'm a the platform for children. I don't want any nudity. I don't want any swearing. I don't want any bullying. And so I can go in here and I can say, okay, here's a model for bullying. Here's a model for swearing. Here's a model for nudity. This is what my policy violation looks like. And then I send in my content via API. And then we basically fan it out. We have our models that run. And then we can provide a risk score. Like, what is the probability that this item is risky? It's not severity, it's probability of risk. And then basically clients can come in and they have a UI and they have moderators and they can say, ooh, like any item that's like, more than 80% probability of risk, I want to automatically remove it. So they have these codeless workflows where they can just set it up. Any item that's like less than 50, I don't even want to look at it. And then there's this sort of sliver of window where I say, okay, these are things that require an expert to look at. And the idea being is that we care about not only the user's well-being, but also the moderator's well-being, right? And we don't want to expose them unnecessarily to harms, right?
Yeah.
So we can catch the things that are highly probable of being risky and just remove them, then we've spared them from like this gory, awful stuff.
Yeah, I actually heard about that back in the day on how people that were doing content moderation for Facebook, it was like menial things 80 or 90% of the time. And then they would be clicking through and like, whatever, boring, boring, boring. And then bam, just getting something that would rock your socks off and give you nightmares for the next 2 weeks. And so it feels like if you can remove that completely, that's very valuable. And now going back to the idea of the models that you have, you're allowing someone to choose which models. And I'm assuming when we say models here, it's like policy models, or is it machine learning models or AI models there?
A little bit of all of the above.
Okay.
It depends on the use case, right? So our system needs to be able to handle thousands of requests per second at very, very low latency. If you think about it, things are coming online all the time. The only way to deal with this massive amount of content at scale is with models that are able to do the work faster and more efficient and with less like mental harm than humans. And so we have transformer models, we have ensemble models, we have everything under the sun we use, where our big focus is on ensuring that it's also very cost effective and very accurate. And as much as we can, we want to like win on both. And usually we do okay.
So the idea is fascinating to me when it comes to all the different models that you're using, making sure that they are fast and they're accurate, because usually, especially these days with transformers, it's like you kind of sacrifice one for the other, right? You've sacrificed speed at the, maybe it's not the most accurate, or you want accurate and it's not super fast. How do you think about that trade-off?
We don't always use like, the most accurate model that's like the slowest and heaviest, but sometimes that's what's necessary. And we also try to sort of enable our customers to be part of that conversation, like what's more important to you, right? So for example, for some use cases, keywords are fine, like they're totally good. And we have a keyword matching tool that's completely self-service. You can like put in the keywords that you want, put in even the emojis that you want, because in a lot of cases, like for example, in drug trafficking, emojis are super important. In child pornography also, emojis are very, very important. If you think about it, this is like a very evasive field, right? And so we have a tool that basically enables clients and also our subject matter experts to sort of put in the emojis or the keywords or whatever in the languages that are relevant, and then run with that. And that's super fast, super cheap, super effective. We can do different workflows. And so we could do something like, if this triggered, then let's run that and let's see what, something heavier picks it up. So we have different ways of handling that. But at the end of the day, also for some models, like a video model, then there needs to also be an expectation of like, this isn't going to be instantaneous, right? Or an image model that's taking an image apart and breaking it up into components and looking for logos and known bad actors and victims and all these things. It's, let's set an expectation of how long something like that can reasonably take and at what price.
One thing that I do remember from your talk was how hard the cultural references are. And so how are you making sure, not only from like the subject experts, so I guess you have to have somebody that understands the cultural references and can then translate that into the models. How does that happen?
Yeah, so at ActiveFence, we're very, very fortunate to have a very large team of experts, of subject matter experts, of intelligence analysts, and they're experts in child safety, in hate speech, in, they know about like vegan neo-Nazi group in Argentina. Like they know all these sort of like edge cases. They know the news groups, the news. And we work really closely with them. And so when we're developing a new model, the first thing that we have to do is we have to say, okay, what is the policy, right? What is in and what is out? Because if you don't have a very, very clear policy, then that's going to influence everything downstream. It's going to influence your data labeling. It's going to influence your evaluation, and it's going to influence you when you reach production. And so we work very, very closely with the policy manager, and also with these experts to define what's in and what's out. And then, we go out, we have a data ops operation here that can collect the data, whether it's from like real traffic or from forums, or even generate the data, right? So we can, in some
I was
cases,
just going to ask.
yes. One thing that we do, is we generate data, either manually or with the help of an LLM friend. And the reason that we do that is to combat bias, exactly for the things that you're talking about. But in order to identify that we even have bias, it's not enough to sort of just look at precision recall. Just now, we had a model that we were working on. I think it was sex solicitation, but it might have been something else. I can't remember. Where we looked and we're like, great, precision recall, amazing. And then we ran our functional tests. And functional tests is something that I highly, highly recommend for anyone that's building a model.
And what are these? What are functional?
So a functional test, what this does is it basically enables targeted identification of model weak spots. What that means is that you basically take subsets of your policy or subsets of your target definition, if you will, and you write tests specifically for those things. So for example, for hate speech, you can have reclaimed slurs. You can have hate speech expressed using a slur, right? These are sort of two sides of a coin. And you want to have a test that basically ensures that it's, if I say, I'm proud to be a, or I'm the freshest in town, these should always be negative, right? This is like a set of, a bunch of examples of reclaimed slurs that I need to make sure that my model doesn't mess it up, right? Because that's like one subset of my target definition. If I say, you are just a to me, or I hate or dirty right? These are slurs. And I'm going to have a bunch of those examples. And I want to make sure that my model is consistently performing and flagging those as negative. And I have a huge bank of functional tests. And then, precision recall is important, but I want to look at how I perform on these. Because then I can say, oh, great, my model is amazing, except I'm always failing. For example, on harassment and bullying, for a while, we were always failing on like wishing someone cancer. Like we just couldn't get that. And you need to catch that, right? And so, sorry, my threshold for like things that like make me uncomfortable is like not normal after working here. So like, I'm sorry.
No, it's totally fine. It's just, I was just thinking like, I would never want to get into an argument with you because you probably have the best disses in the world. You've seen all of the worst kind of shit.
The egg. Did I come work here because of that, or did I?
Oh, I didn't think about that part. Yeah. So sorry, I digress. Where were you?
That's what I'm saying. So those are the functional tests, right? And so then and also what this helps you is like looking at over time, right? So like you have a new model, or we're in an adversarial space, the world changes, and suddenly we're like falling apart on a specific type of functionality. And then what we can do is, okay, so we've discovered, a functionality that we're bad at. So what do? So we can go out, if we're like bad on many functionalities, then we can just like go out and get more data, fine. But if it's a specific functionality, then we can generate more data to address that particular bias that we have, right? And that can be done manually, or like I said, with like Gen AI techniques.
So many questions from this, and I love what you're doing and how much depth you're going into. Your LLM friend, it's not your run-of-the-mill Llama 3, I imagine, because those have been handicapped. They're not going to spit out all kinds of generated data that is going to help you in your use case, I would imagine. Or are you creating your own model that is highly toxic, we could say?
So two things. One is a lot of times it's really, really helpful to use the LLM actually to generate the benign side of things, right? So a lot of times bias is actually like if your negative examples are all like slurs about a particular ethnicity, then you want to add data that's like shows that ethnicity in a positive light. And so that is easy to do with any LLM. Like give me some examples of, of texts about whatever, about, some religion or whatever, and it'll just give you, and those are good. And those are reasonable. And I'll say that one advantage of having subject matter experts working with us and having teams that part of what we do is we do red teaming for big foundational models is that we also know how to cause even the best of models to behave badly.
Break down. Nice. Yeah, very cool. That's always fun trying to trick them. And getting to do that as a job, I find very interesting.
Yeah.
The other piece that I wanted to go down is, okay, so you've got all of this data, or you've created this model. I can see various scenarios on how this can become not that useful very quickly, whether it is new terms that are coming into vogue, we could say, or you have a lot of data that was generated, or the model was created and it's almost like this snapshot in time for up until a certain date, and then it has the cutoff, so the new terms come in and then you can't use it. And so you have blind spots there. Are you continuously retraining to make sure that, okay, and how does that process look?
So one thing that we do is, first of all, like before we deploy to production, I think we do a lot of back testing. We look at it on, production data that we had, and we sort of look at even on unlabeled data. We'll look at distribution of scores, right? You want to see, and you want to look at things. If you have things that are labeled, then we look at things that flipped, right? And then we say, okay, does it make sense that it flipped? Are we better with our flip or worse with our flip? And then also just look at on unlabeled data, like what's my distribution, right? If I have a new model where now things are like much, much, much more positive, unlikely, right? Or much, much, much more negative, also unlikely. So that's like before we even head out into the world. But obviously, your model hits production, and sometimes you fall apart right away, and sometimes you fall apart later. But at the end of the day, like the world is tough and
not forever. Yeah.
And so what we do is we actually have an auditing process. And so we have trained analysts that will sort of do audits of our models in production based on real production data. And also some clients also share with us, enable us to sort of see their moderator decisions. And so we have like real labels from how our model is performing. And then we have sort of our policy managers and analysts look and say, you know what, there's a trend I'm seeing here now. Like somehow you're always missing that when they're talking about like food, it's actually not hate speech. And this actually happened to us. Like we had a food delivery company and we had a hate speech model because they didn't want people, it was like a chat or review system or whatever on their website. And our model went to production, and suddenly we were flagging like, I hate Indian food, or like Chinese suck, or all these things. And it's like people are talking about food. Like they're not talking about the people. And then so these and then we're like, okay, now we need to go into like a targeted like model improvement session, retraining and so forth. And then bring it out. And this is constant. So we're sort of at the same time that we're developing new models and sort of coming up with new sort of policy areas to cover, we're also like retraining our models and ensuring that we're up to date based on sort of looking at how the model is actually performing in the real world. And again, we'll also look at the distribution of scores in the real world, right? We don't need labels to be like, there's drift here, like something is going on.
Yeah. And so basically it's me choosing as a customer when I'm hitting your API, how many different models and protocols I want to be looking at my data from. And so for each one of these, I'm assuming that it's not just like one model each. Maybe you have an ensemble of models for certain types of use cases.
Yeah.
Can you break that down?
Absolutely. So one example is like I was saying for hate speech or for terror. Terror is an example. So we know how to look for specific components of like different objects or different markers within the image. And then basically those go into a trained ensemble model that's able to give what is the probability. So for example, we have logos. So, ISIS and Hezbollah and others. We have faces there. So known bad actors. And this is relevant not only for terror. Like, did you know that there's also logos for child pornography studios? Like those are other logos that we can look for. And so in many different situations, we basically can break apart the image, look for known victims, look for nudity, look for, things that are indicative of child pornography, hate speech, terror, and so forth.
So the experts here are involved in the curation of data, making sure that you have robust data when you're training these models. but then they're also getting involved in that like 50 to 70% that gets flagged as a maybe? Or is that just getting thrown back to the your clients as like, you might want to check this out?
We do content moderation in terms of like showing what's the probability of risk, but we don't have moderators, right? That's the client. But what we do is we do internal audits for ourselves to ensure that our models are still performing like how they should be. So that like 50 to 70%, that's out of my game, right? That's like goes to the client. They can do with what they want. I can recommend to them, right? Like I can say, look, there's a 90% probability that this is child pornography. But if they look at it and they say not by me, or they don't want to, that's them. But I do have on my end, I'm going to be auditing that and using it to improve my abilities to detect. I was going to sort of say that like all of this we're talking about is just like regular content that we see online or whatever. But right now with Gen AI, like the space has changed, right? And so if it used to be that like making high quality bad content or like malicious content, you could do it at a low scale to make it high quality, or you could do it at a very high scale and make it really low quality. Like now you can do, really, really high scale and really high quality malicious content, which just means that the need for AI is that much stronger because the only way to do it at scale is with AI. And the thing is that for us, like just like we've been the experts and we've built a lot of expertise in content moderation, like we're sort of transferring that to AI safety.
And how much of this also is just trying to detect if it is AI generated, or do you not care about that at all?
So for our space, that's less of an issue, right? Because child pornography is bad, whether it's real or Gen AI. Like, I don't want that on my platform. I don't want to be exposed to that. Same thing with terror, same thing with, misinformation, same thing with hate speech. It doesn't matter. It's bad. And so that means that at the end of the day, like regular UGC, like user-generated content, and AI-generated content are pretty similar in the space that we're at, which means that we can leverage our experience and be the experts here as well. Basically taking everything that we know from the trust and safety space and just transfer learning it. And so for both of them, you need this sort of like multi-layer detection, and you want to mitigate in different places in the life cycle. And so there's also, except that there's sort of a twist here, I guess, where with AI generated content, we can enter sort of the food chain earlier on.
How's that?
So if for user generated content, we can catch it on the platform side, right? Like once it's come to the social media platform or the gaming platform or the dating platform, that's where we're at, and we can help them find it. But with AI generated content, we can actually be at the source, right, where these Gen AI models are being trained. And actually, we have partnerships with Cohere and with NVIDIA specifically for that.
Nice.
To sort of help improve the models in red team and so forth, and already at the source. It's obviously not enough, because besides the big foundational models, there's also open source models, and even foundational models can, make mistakes and so forth. And so we need to be at both places, but we're moving up sort of in the food chain with Gen AI. With NVIDIA, actually, I don't know if you've heard of guardrails.
Yeah. Nemo.
Yep.
Nemo guardrails. Yeah.
Nice. So you can actually, through Nemo guardrails, you can hook up to our API with an API key and have our models sort of on your prompts and on your outputs to ensure that they're safe.
Oh, that's cool. So then it's like that added confidence that you're going to not be having anything that you don't want coming through.
Yeah.
Now, one thing that I was thinking about on this was, like, are you just using Cohere models off the shelf, or is everything that you're doing super fine-tuned for these different use cases?
So Cohere is actually, they're a client of ours. So we're helping them make their models safer. So in a lot of the things that we learn with our work with them, are useful for us to understand sort of how to make safer models. And so that's like a different kind of partnership. With NVIDIA, they're using our models, our predictive models, in order to provide risk scores on input and outputs in NeMo guardrails. And then in-house, we use a wider range of solutions, of Gen AI solutions, if we need to generate data.
And so the solutions are on or let me take a step back. It's like one part of the pipeline is generating the data. And then another part is having that machine learning or AI model, or a lot of them. You maybe have the computer vision model that will give you the text that's in the meme that is potentially harmful. And you've also got the model that's going to tell you if that text is good or bad and give it that score. And you've probably got a few other models in there. None of these are like you being able to send any of that information to like an off-the-shelf model, I would imagine, because it has to be very, very specific to each one of these use cases and like built from the ground up, if I'm understanding it correctly.
Yes, correct. Yes, that is exactly right. You'll see like open source models for like finding hate speech or for finding this or whatever. And what we found is they can't work at scale, right? They're going to fall apart at the scales that we're running at. There's no way. They are inconsistent. If we like take it back, remember I said policy is important. They're inconsistent in their policy. They don't get the nuances, right? Like if we look at all of our functionalities, they fall apart. We take the integrity of our data and the integrity of our labels and then, as a correlate, as the integrity of our models, like extremely, extremely seriously. These are important decisions. These are important things that, that we're doing. And so the quality, the data quality, and then the model quality and the performance at scale in production is something that we take very seriously.
And for the performance side, I often wonder about this, like if you're using transformer models or LLMs, how are you making sure that there's not hallucinations happening? And because it seems like you have to be very confident of the accuracy. And sometimes with transformer models, they can just say whatever they want, especially if they don't know or they've never seen this particular type of hate speech. So is that where you're talking about like you're constantly monitoring for the drift to make sure that whatever you've labeled, you're double checking and seeing if it is true, if it's not? How does that break down?
Yeah. So with any model, we want to look at the functionalities. And so like if there's a new type of hate speech that we didn't know before, then the policy manager, will say, hey, there's this new functionality that we have to make sure that we cover, and we can catch it proactively. If we don't catch it proactively because suddenly there's like a new slang term or a new style, or everything is the same in the hate speech world, but the data is a type of data that we've never seen before, right? Like food reviews or book reviews or whatever. And for whatever reason, we didn't test on that data, and suddenly we fall apart. And so that's why we're constantly auditing and like looking and improving, and we're retraining a lot to ensure that we're sort of not drifting and that our performance stays high. In terms of LLMs. We're not using currently LLMs for inference because at the scale and at the cost that we need to perform at, it just doesn't make sense, right? We need to make sure that our clients and us, we don't lose an arm and a leg in terms of like being able to predict and to give value at such a high scale. And so we use LLMs intensively beforehand, but at prediction time, we need much more robust solutions.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it's totally like, it's what you would expect almost, right? Because the LLMs are much slower and be a little bit less trustworthy on the output, they can hallucinate or do whatever. I would hope that either you knew some kind of trick and you had some special magic pill or silver bullet, or you're doing that, which totally makes sense. Now, the auditing process for me feels like something that is very rigorous. Can you go into that a little bit more and what the whole audit looks like and how then you make sure to like continuously stay at a very high accuracy?
Yeah. So even before the auditing, but in addition to the functional tests that I talk about, which I think are like really, really critical, we also do other types of tests. So we have a go, no-go test, which basically what we say is this is like a set of data that we can't afford to mess up on, right? Like these terms are always positive and these terms are always negative. And if we fail on them, then that's a no-go for the model, right? This is like a data set that basically is like go, no-go. Can this model go to production based on these? Because I can never have like hello world or I love you be hate speech. Like that won't work, or hi, right? There's things that are just, and so there's that. We also have a false positive rate test. So what we do is we'll take our model and we'll run it on data that is supposed to be completely benign and also on data that's like borderline. And then we can see like what is our false positive rate. So for example, for hate speech, we can run it on Harry Potter or on some book for a hate speech text, and there shouldn't be any hate speech in there. And if there is, then we can analyze the situations where it did get flagged, like what are these false positives, and then understand our model a bit better and understand, okay, like why is it flagging this and what can I do, and sort of retrain again. For child pornography or child abuse, we can run it, for the benign data, we can just run it on like Google open image, like, just like a dump of images or whatever. And then like make sure that like you don't get, a positive score on like a picture of a keyboard or whatever. But we can also run it on images that are like a little trickier for the model, like Sports Illustrated, women in swimsuits, mothers kissing babies, breastfeeding, people on the beach, toddlers in diapers, things that are like not seasoned, but they do have, like bare body and children and, children on a playground, things like that. And then you want to make sure that like none of those are flagged either. And they're sort of more towards the border and like more difficult for the model. And so these are all things that we do like, pre-production or like before, after retraining to ensure that we're like still like at keeping our quality high. In terms of like once we're in production, then like I said, we can do a couple of things. Or a few things. We can just look at our distribution of scores, right? And sort of start to notice, like, are we drifting? Like, are our scores suddenly like much, much, much lower or much, much higher? Because probably like at the scales that we're talking about, the world isn't suddenly becoming really friendly, right? Like people are still being mean, people are still doing things. So
that's
the scores are changing. There's something going on.
As much as we would like the world to be becoming more friendly, that's usually not the answer.
And also we have we'll do audits specifically targeted for customers. Like let's look at like really, really high scores. Let's look at a little bit of scores in the middle. Let's sort of look at, the hardest is to find false negatives, but we can also sample within the data and be like, okay, things, with this keyword or this sort of things, like let's look at all of them and see what the distribution of scores were. And are these negative ones like really negative? Like, for example, we used to have something like one thing that we look at is like token overfitting. So I like black coffee or I hate black coffee or I love Chinese food or I hate Chinese food. We want to make sure that like those aren't being flagged. And if they are, then we need to find ways to sort of combat that. And we can look for that also in production data to make sure that, our functional tests are still valid in production.
Okay. So, and then you have the audits that you'll go through, and there's the false positive, there's the go, no go, there's the functional tests. And then once it's out in the wild, you're just looking at it and you're seeing, did we overfit for some things? Let's look at this distribution score. Let's see where we're at. Do you also have integration tests and like unit tests and these kind of things?
Yes. Sorry.
Okay.
To me, that goes without saying. That's like before. Yes,
Okay.
of course.
Okay, cool.
Yes, we do all that. We have end-to-end tests. We also, before a model hits production, we do load tests. We want to make sure that we're still able to that we haven't changed anything so that, it can still meet the load. We look at the price, like what instances it's on. So we have a lot of like heavy engineering work that we do before a model like ever sees the light of day. And also the functional tests and the go-no tests, they're also run on production data, right? Like while the model is out in the wild, like just, they're not only done like when we've been trained, right? They should be done constantly. And also the audits is that we have our policy managers and we have analysts that are going in and sampling data and looking at the data and saying like, is this a false positive? Like they'll look at the high scores and say, okay, like this is a mistake, this is a mistake. And then they go and they sort of summarize it for us and say, hey, guess what? Every time someone talks about food, you're flagging it. I keep bringing up food because like it was like the first like big fiasco that we had.
So the process that I would love for you to walk me through is, how does it look like when the data scientist has whatever hate speech model, one that they're going to be using, very specific, whatever it may be, and they're like, this is good. I'm ready to bring this to production. I'm ready to... Are you throwing it over the fence, giving it to somebody? Do they run with it? How does that look to like take it from the potentially Jupyter Notebook, if they're playing in that, and then now being served as an API at very low latency?
So what we have is we serve our models. We use Kubernetes. We're on AWS, and but basically our inference pipeline, our inference infrastructure we built it ourselves. We were looking at all kinds of different vendors, and we decided that in order to really keep costs low and at this scale, we didn't want to sort of pay an overhead for every inference. It just didn't make sense. And so we were also able basically to write, at least for our text models right now, and this is something that we're still working on this infrastructure, basically to have sort of like a no-code deployment workflow for our data scientists. So once for like architectures that we know and have been load tested and we're very comfortable with, there's like a very easy path for them to basically just deploy to production. And the data scientists, they do that. I strongly believe that people should write code for production, including data scientists. I think that sort of like if your output is a Python notebook, then you lose a bit of the ownership. And even though the data scientists are not the ones usually waking up at night for on-calls, right? That's like the engineers, but it's theirs. They own it. They know it. They're familiar with it. It's part of their ownership. And so it's not that they sort of like just do the research and then kind of like kick it over and say, hey, someone else needs to take this.
Yeah, you're preaching to the choir. The production code, we actually have a channel in our MLOps.community Slack that is called production code, and it is 100% that, just like talking about how we can make sure that we're writing more and better code, production code, especially those who are data scientists or have data science backgrounds, and understanding the benefits of that will take you so far.
Absolutely. Yep. So the MLOps team is like very focused on writing the infrastructure so that that can happen seamlessly. But the ownership and pushing it there needs to lie also with the data scientists.
Yeah, it's fascinating too to think about, okay, you created almost like this no-code solution so that it eliminates the friction that the data scientists have once they have the confidence that like, all right, this model is going to be better, and if passed all the checks that I need it to pass, then they can push it and say, all right, cool, now let's go. And they have that ownership. They can take it across the finish line.
I will say that it's not completely seamless. It's not completely smooth. We're constantly learning. Like, we're still building. We're a startup. But yes, that part works.
Yeah. There's other parts, that are fun and that you're probably digging into. And I can imagine. I can imagine a ton. So there is so much good stuff that we talked about here. I think the thing for me that is one of the hardest problems that you're dealing with is a ton of languages, a ton of cultural references, trying to make sure that you are not just like taking all the fun out of the internet because I as you mentioned, you could overfit, and now somebody says hello world and boom, that's flagged.
Yeah.
And so how can you find that proper medium that is not taking the fun out of it, and just like flagging everything, but also not being too lenient and not flagging the things that definitely should be flagged?
Yeah. So, I mean, this is a well-known business problem, right? Where you have sort of this balance between precision and recall. And a lot of times it's also it's a client question, right? Like how sensitive are you? So if you're a child's platform, then you probably want to err on the side of like high recall, right? And even at the cost of precision, and you'd want to like overflag and yeah, take some of the fun out, because at the end of the day, I don't care if they're limited to like 12 words they can type. Like that's fine. At least they're safe.
Yeah.
Versus if you're a dating platform, you're going to be a little bit more tolerant of like, some a little bit more exciting talk. And so it's a business question. We have our policy, and like when we're building a model, like I said, we're like very, very clear about our policy. The policy manager is like works very closely with our data scientist. He's at all of their dailies. Anytime there's a question, there's like it's an ongoing conversation, because sometimes the policy will say something and then we'll be like, yeah, but what about this example? Like, is this not? And the labelers are always asking and we're always asking. So it's sort of this like constant conversation to make sure that at least in terms of our policy, our data quality, our labeling is like very, very high quality. And that's also something that we communicate to the client. Like, this is our policy. If you're more sensitive, then you can add a keyword, right? So if, for example, our hate speech policy, reclaimed slurs are not hate speech. So if I'm saying like, I'm proud to be a, then that's not hate speech. It's reclaiming, right? Or don't call me a, that's not hate speech. That's like victim, like, asserting themselves. But for some platforms, any slur is not okay. Like, I don't want you to use that word at all. And so that has nothing, like my model is not going to be like tuned to that particular, sensitivity level. And so for that, we have our keyword tool. Feel free, add the keyword in, describe how it is, and then just add it to your model. And then like that'll be the right sensitivity level. And then if you want, you can take all the fun out that way. I have some level of fun. And so it's, again, and then also clients can set their own threshold, right? So I give the probability of risk. And then if you're like very, very, very sensitive and you don't want anything, you'll set that threshold really, really low. And then you'll make sure that anything that's like even a little bit probable of risk will get flagged. And if you're not sensitive, then just set your threshold really high and go have all the fun you want.
Yeah. Well, it does feel like the main thing that you're probably doing continuously is labeling data. Is that safe to say? Like you or the teams, I would imagine, like it feels like 90% of this happens at the data labeling phase to make sure that whatever goes through the pipeline and is then on the output gets flagged or is caught.
So I think there's two things that make our solution, our models, or three things that make our solutions, our models so powerful. The first is really the subject matter experts and the intelligence analysts, and the fact that we really know this world, right? Like we know how to build a policy. We know what it means to be hate speech, what it means to be harassment, bullying, what it means to be suicide, self-harm. Like we know this really well.
And in different languages, right? In different cultures.
Yes, many. And we also have cultural context. So calling someone a dog in one language is not the same as calling them a dog in a different language. And so we're sensitive to that, and we know how to do that. And what that means is that our data quality is very, very, very high, because it's so linked to our intelligence analysts and to our policies. And we're also very aware that like that's what gives us an edge, right? Like our data is our gold, right? Like this is what like we've invested a lot of this, and this is what it's what our models are built on. And then the other part of that is that we just have killer engineers and killer data scientists that are able to take this this data and turn it into something that's able to make a real impact in the world at scale.
It's two parts of the puzzle, because you can have all the data in the world that is very high quality data, but if you can't operationalize that with a machine learning model, then it's as good as nothing.
Right. So that's like the raw materials. We need to know what to do with raw materials. And that's why also I said that there's like a lot of open source models out there, and oftentimes they fall apart at the data, right? Like they can throw like a really big, cool model at something, and then it won't run at scale. It'll fall out in production. And also it's based on poorly labeled data or inconsistent labeled data. And then it doesn't matter like how amazing the algorithm is. It makes sense.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And it seems like the other piece, for better or worse, like I can imagine it is hard being some of these subject matter experts, because you have to go into the depths of like the worst parts of the internet.
Yes. So we take the well-being of our labelers and of our experts very, very seriously. We have a psychologist on staff. We have like well-being programs. This is something that's not taken lightly. Like I said, we care a lot about this. This is another reason, like putting AI in the loop here. It's not only because it's like really, it's the only way to combat this, right? Like there's the sheer scale of things, like you can't do it manually, but it's also because we want to offload and sort of focus human energy only on where it's like going to be most important and most effective.
Yeah, the questions and that burden, it makes a lot of sense. So incredible. Thank you so much for coming on here and talking to me about this. I am thoroughly fascinated by it, and I think you're doing so much great work. And as a father of 2 daughters, I know I told you this before, but I'll tell you it now that we're recording. I am so grateful that people like you and ActiveFence exist because it is just I know the internet isn't going to always be like 100% safe, but it does feel like at least you're trying to do something to make it a little bit safer.
Thank you. It was great being here. I was really excited to get to speak to you, and thank you for inviting me. I hope I get to keep doing great work. Important.
Excellent.